First, the king's crown of gold. The border garnished with 6 balances, 5 sapphires, 5 pointed diamonds, 20 rubies, 19 pearls.
Historic Royal Palace has decided to recreate Henry VIII's crown because the story that we're telling in the royal apartments at Hampton Court Palace is all about dynasty, it's about the succession, and as we near the end of Henry VIII's reign, the question uppermost in everybody's minds is who wears the crown next. And so the crown really is a physical embodiment of this dynastic story and a great focus for the end of the visitor route.
The crown is hugely important to Hampton Court because Hampton Court was created by the Tudors as a place of royal ceremony. And Henry wore this crown when he was participating in some of the richest and most lavish moments in that kind of court ceremony. So in particular, when the Tudor court all come together for Christmas, Henry would process to chapel and he would process dressed up in his coronation regalia in the same clothes that he wore when he was crowned, and that included carrying an orb and sceptre and having his crown on his head. And so this gave you an opportunity to see the king at his most royal and regal.
For the first time in 7 years, visitors will be able to walk in Henry VIII's footsteps into the front of the Royal Pew, and they'll see the amazing Tudor ceiling as he saw it. And really this is the most Tudor view of the chapel that you can get today. They'll then round the corner and they'll see the crown positioned where Henry would have worn it himself on high days and holidays when he processed to chapel. And that's an incredibly resonant object. It's an object of both religious and secular power, so the Chapel Royal really is the appropriate place to display it.
The thing that gave us the real confidence that we could recreate Henry VIII's crown was when we started comparing the inventory evidence, so the lists that describe the crown, with the painting evidence, the visual depictions of the crown, and we started seeing how closely those matched up, and we became confident that we could recreate something in 3 dimensions. We have some pictorial evidence of Henry VIII wearing crowns himself from illuminated manuscripts, but they tend to be really schematic. But the really wonderful evidence we have for the crown is a portrait of Charles I by someone called Daniel Mytens, painted in 1631. And on a table behind Charles I, you see, painted in remarkable detail, the crown.
The cap goes inside the crown and it has 2 main purposes. The first is to infill the centre of the crown, and so the dark purple of the velvet really offsets the gold and the gems well. And the second purpose is to actually make the crown comfortable to wear. We have 2 sorts of evidence for the appearance of the cap. The first is written material, and the best comes from the 1547 inventory, which tells us that it was made of purple silk velvet and lined with black silk satin. But we also have great wardrobe accounts which make it clear that we don't have any fur, for instance, on the cap.
The inventory data has been hugely important because it tells us 2 key things. The first thing it tells us is the basic form of the crown. So it describes the key elements, the base around the bottom, the crosses and fleur-de-lis, and the fact that there were 5 crosses and 5 fleur-de-lis alternating, and then the diadem on top, the 4 struts that come up and meet the orb at the top. And then the second thing that the inventory data does is to describe piece by piece every single pearl, jewel, and other decoration on the crown. So it tells you not only the form of the crown, but how each bit of the crown is decorated. because the paintings that we have don't give you lots of fine detail, we had to look at other examples of 16th century goldsmith work and jewellery, in particular the crown from the Honours of Scotland, which has settings very similar to the ones that would have been on Henry VIII's crown.
Commissioning the crown was actually relatively simple for historic royal palaces because we worked very closely with Harry Collins, the Crown Jeweller, at the Tower of London, taking care of the crown jewels and displaying them to visitors there. So when we first came up with the idea of recreating Henry VIII's crown, we turned to Harry and asked him if he might be prepared to help.
I was working on the Crown Jewel project in the Tower of London, which was a complete refurbishment of the crown jewels, which are looking wonderful. And I was asked at that period by historic royal palaces whether I would be interested in recreating Henry VIII's crown, which is a natural big yes. The crown's made from solid silver, and then we've gilded on top, and after a hard gold plating we've gilded in a fine gold finish, which recreates exactly what it would have looked like in gold. The whole thing was put together starting with the base. And then the diadem soldered onto the top section. This was a separate unit, completely detached. And then the crosses and fleur-de-lis were attached after. Fleur-de-lis were cut out in a section from solid silver with a hand-turned twist with wire, which would have been a square wire, and then turned by hand from a vice grip, just as they would have done in that period. And then we haven't used a modern soldering system where you wouldn't see and it'd be all the way through. We've soldered in sections as it would have been then.
The crown was astonishingly decorated. There were 344 jewels and gems and pearls, 21 sapphires, 2 emeralds, 27 diamonds, 233 pearls of all sorts of different sizes.
Harry's brief to me was very simply to recreate the look that we had seen in the painting of Charles I in the National Portrait Gallery of Henry VIII's crown. The stones were found primarily in Sri Lanka, but they'd also been sourced in Madagascar. The stones were cut in cabochon form, or en cabochon, which means a curved, domed surface, but we had to recreate not only that, but also that antique look, which meant a slightly irregular surface achieved by using very antiquated wheels to do the cutting.
One of my favourite discoveries from the research has been that the sculptures that are around the side of the crown, 3 Christs were changed for 3 kings after the Reformation, and that's a brilliant illustration for visitors of the effects of the break with Rome.
You appear to have a very deliberate iconographic change happening where the Christs are taken off, and at the moment when Henry VIII is taking on the role of being the supreme head of the Church of England and breaking with Rome, he is placing on the English crown 3 English kings, almost certainly English royal saints, so people like Edward the Confessor, St Edmund, Henry VI, who is venerated, or starting to be venerated as a saint by the Tudor court, and using those to display the religious authority and spiritual authority of the English monarchy alongside its secular authority. The crown continues in use as part of the crown jewels right up until the English Civil War, and then after the English Civil War it's melted down by Parliament and turned into coin, and all the jewels are sold off in packets.
A reconstruction like this helps us see just how bright and wonderfully sumptuous court dress was. It's often difficult to tell when looking at the portraits just how visually impressive the regalia would have been, and this crown makes it very, very apparent.
This has been certainly one of my most loved projects. I don't see how it can be beaten, really. I just have enjoyed it from the very moment I was asked. I've eat it for breakfast, lunch and dinner. I wake up seeing Charles I standing by it.
The phrase honour and a privilege has been somewhat overused, but I would classify it as both of those. It has been a tremendous honour and a privilege.
The crown is a fabulous object that's going to dazzle visitors. But it works a lot harder than that interpretively, and really allows us to tell this amazing dynasty story where Henry VIII walked with his crown and processed with his crown at Hampton Court Palace.